All right, so, it's an amazing thing when patients tell their stories. And so often our patients are in the middle of their journey. Sometimes they're really struggling with their journey. But I love this story because, Randy, you and I have known each other now for over a decade. And every time I see you, you look healthier.
Thank you.
Jan? Okay.
There we go. Well, thank you for that.
So, I know your story, but I would like you to just, let people know, we all hear about heart attacks, right? And we hear about transplants, and, we've been doing that for years. But what happens if you need a transplant and there's no heart?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity here. I just want to say thank you for all the stories we've heard to this point. I feel like I've gotten so involved with each of you telling your stories, and I've seen so much of my story and yours as well. And I feel like I'm a little emotionally wrung out at this point, just like I've gone through the journey so many times today with so many of you. So I'm sure some of you feel that way as well. But thank you for your patience and for continuing to be here and being open to hearing more stories. So a little bit about mine. My journey kind of started when I was 12. I had a case of rheumatic fever living in Mesa, which at the time, from what I was told, it had been somewhere near 30 years since somebody living in the valley had been diagnosed with rheumatic fever. So it took a long time to get diagnosed, and by the time I was diagnosed, it was actually my family had taken a trip up to Utah, and I had an uncle up there, and he basically told my mom, "Hey, well, go to the primary children's hospital just up the road. They've got all the resources in the world." And there was a doctor there named Peter Vesey who was getting ready to I was told was getting ready to retire, but then later I found out he went for another 15 plus years as a pediatric cardiologist. So, but he had seen everything, and he diagnosed me within 10 minutes of seeing me. That started a kind of a long journey. When I was 17, I had a recurrence of the same thing. And for those of you who don't know, it's basically caused by a bacterial infection, basically strep throat, and that bacteria kind of migrates, goes through parts of your other parts of your body. It can cause scarlet fever in some people, rheumatic fever, which basically it rested on my heart valves and it affected my valves. So I ended up with a murmur. I ended up with the blood going through my heart kind of coming back, and it wasn't getting pumped out the way it was supposed to. Well, my recurrence at 17, I was recommended to have one of my valves replaced. And that was a process that through insurance and everything else ended up taking, I think close to a year is what it took at that time. And I was a senior in high school when I was told I needed it, and I remember thinking, well, they're going to crack my chest open. I'm probably going to die. I don't want to die in school, so I dropped out my senior year. Figured if I was going to die, I was going to die on my terms. And so it kind of surprised me after I went through all that, that I was alive. I came home and I'm like, well, shoot, now I'm a high school dropout. Now what do I do? So I went back, finished high school, lived a very active, normal life after that. Growing up, baseball was my passion. It was what I wanted to do. I played baseball again afterwards. I went as far as I could in that. Had dreams of going pro. That once I played against some people, I played in a league of people that had some people that had played at the pro level and realized, ooh, there's a whole level I've never seen before, and I'm not in that level. So ended up playing softball most of my life, my adult life, after my wife and I were married, and got pretty competitive at that. Enjoyed that for a while, and eventually got to the point where that was becoming a chore. I was having trouble just running bases. I was getting lightheaded. I started to recognize the symptoms. And the time I was a plumber by trade. I'm still a plumber, but I had started my own business, and I was working anywhere from 50, 60, sometimes 90-hour weeks, doing construction plumbing, which this was back in 2007, 2008. Some of you that in the Phoenix Valley will remember that as being like everybody was building houses everywhere. And so the work was there, and I took it whenever I could. But when I started to get tired and symptomatic, we realized something's going on. And being self-employed, I didn't have insurance. I'd still get checkups once in a while, but I would cash pay, and found that to be much easier than having to deal with insurance. Well, we were recommended to a really good cardiologist up in Tempe named Charles Breed, and we went in and had an appointment with him. And he ran all the tests, and about our third visit in a week, because we'd come in, he did some tests. Then he sent me home on a Holter monitor, which reads your basically you take it home and it reads all of your numbers and what your heart's doing over a 24-hour period. So we went back, we turned it in, and before we got home, he called us and he said, I've cleared my schedule for tomorrow morning. I need to see you guys first thing. And we were like, oh, this isn't good. And my thought at the time, so when I had the surgery at 17 to replace my valve, they'd actually replaced 2 of them, and they'd put in mechanical valves. And they told me there was a lifespan on the valves, and so I thought, well, at some point, in the next 10 years, they had told me that you'll have to have your valves replaced. And I remember thinking, boy, it's probably the valves. They're probably going to have to be replaced. So we went in the next morning and met with him, and basically the only thing working still in my heart was those valves. Everything else on my heart had pretty much failed, but mostly because when they had done the original surgery, it created so much scar tissue that all of that elasticity in that cardiac muscle was not there. And so to make up for the lack of the elasticity, my heart kept enlarging and enlarging and enlarging, trying to push the volume. 6'3", 220 pounds most of my life. It's a lot of blood flow needed for that. And so I was told I needed a transplant, and that changed our life. We had 3 small kids, I think ranging from 12 to 2 at the time, and really didn't know what we were going to do. No insurance, no nothing. And that was the other thing Dr. Breed had told us was, this isn't something you're going to be able to cash pay for. So we went through the Arizona Medicaid program. We went through several other programs. Eventually, I was able to get approved for Medicare. Thank you for Medicare that would cover what I needed. But we did a lot of fundraising during the time too. We did some media, did some interviews. It got a lot of national attention. I think my biggest advocate ended up being Keith Olbermann and his national audience when it came to raising money. So this happened to be around 2008. If some of you will remember, the national race was a lot of it was centered around national health care. It was Obama versus Romney. Think about that time, and Arizona Governor Jan Brewer was involved in that also. So I became what I realized later was a political pawn, as everybody wanted to make me their poster child of their side of why we needed this, why we didn't need that, and why it should be this way. But really what it came down to is even the politicians, well, especially the politicians, didn't really care about my case. They cared about their cause and their side, and I was a convenient tool for them on both sides to try to use. Fast forward a few years, we were told once I was listed for transplant, that it might take up to a year is what we were told, because my blood type, my body size, both made me a difficult match. So as we prepared for that, and I remember thinking, a whole year, that's insane. I might have to wait a whole year for this, because I wanted to get back to life. I had, I've got kids, I've got a business that I had to step away from. I've got all these responsibilities. Well, a year, it turns out, was very optimistic. It ended up taking a little over 5 years before I was able to get a match. Now, one of the things, early on, my wife and I are very, very spiritual. We've got a very good relationship with God. And early on, as we were praying about this, and as I was trying to kind of asking why, what's the purpose? What's going on? What do I need to do? Why is this happening? And how can we get through this? One of the things that I believe God told me early on was that the the heart that I was going to receive was picked for me and that I would receive that heart. But I also was told the person who has that heart, their journey is not done on this earth yet. When their journey is done, then you will get that heart. And so my direction, my thoughts, my prayers were never, please let this happen sooner. Please let this happen now. My direction and my prayers were, let me be ready when that person's time has passed. Because I did not want to be the one to hasten that person's journey out of this life. So as we waited, we were, I think, three and a half years in on the transplant list. And we would come down from living in Mesa, we would come down to Tucson on every 2 weeks, sometimes every week for checkups, all the regular stuff. And for those of you who know my wife, she is the bright spot of my life, and everybody that meets her is immediately just uplifted just from meeting her. And so every time we would go in, everybody, as we'd wait in our exam room, people would all see our name and come in and want to talk to my wife, because everybody just really enjoyed that interaction with her. I was a wallflower, which is fine. But I just remember this one day as we were sitting there and just feeling like things were harder than normal. But 3 or 4 people in a row came in, opened the door, they saw my wife, they lit up, and they said, "Hi, Tiffany, how are you?" And then every one of them looked at me, and their face dropped. And I don't know what they saw, but whatever they saw was something they recognized as being, it's at that point, it's getting too late. And so at that point, the UMC, I think this was even before Banner, still, but the UMC transplant clinic was going through a bit of a rough patch. There'd been some changes in doctors, and the doctor came in at that time, I think it was Dr. Smith. She came in and she said, you're pretty much out of options. Your best option is going to be this artificial heart, and she explained it to us. And I remember thinking, wait, you're going to cut my heart out and put a robot in? And I was like, I don't want to do that. What's plan B? Anything but that. What's plan B? Well, plan B was a PICC line and with an infusion of a drug called dobutamine, which basically wrings out the last little bits of whatever's left in your heart. And I said, plan B. I don't want to have a machine or a robot stuck in my chest. So I went with plan B, which in hindsight was not the right answer, because 6 months worth of that dobutamine being pumped directly into my heart put me into multi-organ failure. And at a certain point in time, my lungs were full of fluid, my kidneys were shutting down, everything in my body was shutting down. And we came in in June of 2013, I believe, and basically we were told, we've gotten to that point. You're not going home today. You're either getting this artificial heart, or you're not going to make it out of here. And I remember sitting, kind of slumping against the wall at this point, and just looking at my wife and saying, I don't know. I couldn't even make the decision. I didn't have the blood flow to my brain to make the decision. I said, what do we do? And she said, we're going to do it. And I was like, oh, okay, we're going to do it. That makes sense. So we opted to get an implantation of the SynCardia Total Artificial Heart. And I didn't know what that would mean at the time. I didn't know what that would add to our journey. All I knew is I've got to stick around for my kids. I've got to stick around for my wife. I want to be there. At this point, I think my oldest daughter was probably 16, and my son was 6 or 7 at the time. And so we went into surgery, and I just remember thinking, whatever happens is going to happen. Well, because we'd waited so long and there were so many complications, the surgery went quite a bit longer than they had anticipated. I coded, I don't remember how many times. Were you? I think we have somebody here who was actually in the room when all this happened, but we don't need to put her on the spot right now. But one of the things they did is because I was losing so much blood, the nurses did a Trendelenburg, which legs up over their shoulders, and I had a central line in my neck which crushed and leaked out, and so now I've got this huge scar on my neck where they can't use my vein for testing. And anyway, long story short, a lot of things happened with this, but as I woke up on all these tubes, all of these hoses, and just kind of wondering what happened. I had some experiences similar to our monk friend. I don't know if he's still here, but I had similar experiences to his. And I remember thinking at one point, so I was on a mattress it was an air mattress, and it was constantly blowing, and so I was kind of waving. And I remember as I was coming conscious, I remember feeling that waving feeling and thinking, well, I guess I didn't make it. I must be in the afterlife. It's what it felt like. And I remember in my mind kind of looking around thinking, well, somebody should be here to take me to the other side. And I remember hoping it was going to be my dad. My dad passed in 2003 from cancer at the age of 51. And kind of in my mind looking around, where's Dad? He's supposed to be here to get me. That's the way this is supposed to work. And then after a little while realizing, oh, I'm still alive. And then thinking, does my wife know I'm here? How did I even get to this point? At one point thinking I'd been in some terrible accident and now I'm in a hospital, and trying to communicate to the doctor, somebody please let my wife know I'm okay. Not realizing she was right there the whole time. Well, my journey on the artificial heart took about 15 months. And during that 15 months, thanks to SynCardia, the company, it kept me alive, but not just alive, it gave me the strength to recover from the lack of blood flow that I'd been undergoing. So one of the things when I was on that dobutamine infusion, so one of my thumbnail, I'd gotten a big black spot on it. It just happened, and then that nail had decayed and it had just fallen off, and so I had a big hole in the back of my thumbnail, and I had gotten in the habit of kind of just rubbing it because it just felt weird, like turning your tongue over on the roof of your mouth. It just felt weird. And so as I was conscious and recovered, I remember doing that and feeling, oh, it had actually grown over. It had healed. It had been there for months at that time, and within that 10 days that I was in an induced coma in recovery, my nail had healed. Another thing that I realized was the skin on my feet was sloughing off in such huge chunks. I'd had such low blood effusion or perfusion before the artificial heart that my body wasn't sending blood to my extremities. It was basically letting my extremities just die off, just trying to keep itself alive. I'd had huge patches of hair that had fallen off in that time that I didn't even realize. And when I woke up after this just 10 days of good blood flow, all of this had healed. My hair was growing back. My skin on my feet was regrowing. My thumbnail had regrown. And I think there are several other examples that at this point I'm not remembering and probably aren't important, but turns out blood flow is actually important for your body. If you didn't know it's helpful. But after 15 months on the artificial heart, it was a Sunday morning. I'd had a friend come down from the valley and hang out for a few hours, or come down from Mesa, hung out for a few hours and talk. And I remember it was the day that the Cardinals were playing the 49ers, and it was the 12 o'clock noon game, and I was all excited. I'd ordered up something from the kitchen. I hadn't had breakfast, but I was looking forward to lunch because I was going to be watching the Cardinals and the 49ers. And my nurse, Sarah, I still remember, she came in and she said, we've got orders that you're NPO, nothing by mouth, not able to eat. And I remember thinking, did they order more tests again for Monday? I was so mad that if they're putting me NPO at noon on a Sunday for tests tomorrow morning, somebody's going to hear about it because I want to eat some, I don't remember what I ordered, but I want to have something to eat while I'm watching this football game. I said, are there tests that they ordered again tomorrow without telling me? And she just shook her head, and I suddenly realized what that meant. And I said, is this the call? And she nodded. She said, I think this is the call. And I turned the TV off, and I just was like, oh boy. And this was the first weekend my wife had not come down to stay with me in like 8 weeks. She'd come every weekend, and I kept telling her, please don't come down. I'm going to be here for a while. It's just the way it is. But suddenly the first weekend she wasn't there. Now all of a sudden I've got the call for a heart. And so I called her, and as soon as she answered the phone, she said, is this what I think it is? And I said, yes. She said, I'm on my way. And so just before midnight on September 13th of 2014, they wheeled me back into the operating room, and I woke up, I think I was awake 11 hours later with a brand new heart beating in my chest. And that was 11 and a half years ago at this point. So we're coming up on our 12-year mark, and I'm grateful for every single day that I've gotten for that. And I owe it mostly to my wife Tiffany, to all my doctors, but also to SynCardia as a company for being there and being that bridge to transplant that allowed me that time to be able to heal and to be able to accept that heart when it was ready for me and help me to be ready for it. So that's my story. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. I actually had the privilege, this is the second time Randy and I have done this together. The first time was about a year after surgery, and he came up and to see you doing so well. Now, there's one thing you left out of this story, okay? Now, think about this, folks. Randy didn't have a heart. He had a mechanical heart. When he ran in Pat's Run, what did they call you?
Well, so the story behind Pat's Run is interesting. I had been on, so as I mentioned, the circumstances to me accepting the artificial heart was my wife saying, yes, we're going to do it, and I acquiesced. And all along this journey, so it'd been about 7 or 8 months, I think, at the time. Every decision to be made was made for me. It was, this is the best thing to do, this is what you need to do. And I felt like a passive participant in all this. My wife was my caretaker. She was the reason I was alive. Everybody else taking care of me, everybody else making the best decisions for me. And I kept feeling like I'm a passive participant in this, and I wanted to do something to take control of my situation and to say, I choose to do this. And I don't remember what put it in my head to think about, it was, somebody had recommended a book to me called Iron Heart, and there's a man named Kyle Gartlett, who had post-transplant had gone and done a full Ironman triathlon. And I remember reading that thinking, man, that's what I want to do. I want to do that afterwards. But I started looking into all of these adventure races, maybe Peru someday, who knows, but I've always loved mountain biking, along with baseball. But mountain biking is, you do 8 or 10 miles and you're good, you're done. And but all of a sudden I'm finding out people ride their bike 100 miles in a day. Well, yeah, that's after their 2.5 mile swim and right before their full marathon. It's like, holy cow. I've still never, I ended up getting into some sprint triathlons after my transplant. But I found out about this Pat's Run up in Tempe, and I thought, man, that's perfect. It's not a 26-mile run. It's a 4.2 mile run. And so I looked into it, and it was about, I think, 3 weeks before it was going to happen. And at the time, my care was at Mayo. I was under the care of Mayo Clinic, and I remember we went into the doctor, and I said, I want to do this. And he tried talking me out of it. And I talked to Steve Langford from SynCardia. I'd become pretty good friends with him through this. And he said, boy, if you're going to do it, you're not going to want to be alone. So if you're going to do it, I'll come up with you. So I had a handful of people. I had a team, quite a bit of a big team actually helped me do it. But we did the 4.2 mile Pat's Run in honor of Pat Tillman. So I don't remember if I came up with the idea or somebody else labeled me the idea, but they, when I talked to some reporters and basically I earned the nickname of the Tin Man. So that's still what I use on all my socials. But eventually the Tin Man got his heart too. So that's the story behind the picture up there of me with the Freedom Driver, the SynCardia Total Artificial Heart Freedom Driver, and my wife wearing our Pat's Run. So that would have been 2014, March or April of 2014 is when that would have been, which was about 5 months before my transplant.
Good. So Amanda, this Randy's story is just so amazing. But, and he shared, whoa, I want to do that, As a care coordinator for people going on this journey, what is that like? How, Randy is amazing, but he's not every patient. How do people deal with this?
So typically, the first answer, as care coordinators, we show the devices to these patients, and we say, we call it our jewelry, because, they're wearing backpacks and accessories. And we say to them, and the caregivers, we say, this is something that will save your life and be a bridge to a transplant. But most of the time, I get pushback and I don't want that, anything but that. Well, you don't have the option of anything but that. And then the tune changes a little bit. But it's hard, as I'm a nurse by background, it's hard to see patients not wanting what we know is beneficial. But it's also something that we have to respect their wishes as well. They have the autonomy to say no, or they have the autonomy to say yes. And so we as coordinators and as nurses have to do our due diligence to provide them the most information that we can possibly give. And a lot of times we will do that. Now, Randy, I didn't care for you, but we will have another artificial heart patient meet a potential patient. And that is a really good bridge to see that these patients are living their lives. They're having a better quality of life outside of the hospital most of the time. Sometimes they're still admitted to the ICU or the PCU units. But it shows them that there is a possibility and that there is hope in trying to get to a transplant. So after the surgery, how is the patient's expectations? How do you manage that expectation? And what surprises them? Well, after an artificial heart implant, I think the biggest surprise is the noise. Correct me if I'm wrong, Randy, but it's an external compressor that is outside of the body that is attached by drive lines in their abdomen, and you can hear the heart beating. And so that is something that takes some getting used to. However, once they move on to a heart transplant, you don't hear your heart anymore, just like all of us. We don't hear our hearts beating inside of our body, usually. So that is something that we as nurses and coordinators have to mentally prepare our patients for. I am YouTube famous and have 32 views on YouTube of the sound of the artificial heart, because most people have a very hard time after having the artificial heart and then not hearing the beating of their heart after transplant. So I'm not really YouTube famous, don't look me up online. But it is a change and it's different. And so it's our responsibility as nurse coordinators to set the expectation and guide these patients and their families through what to expect and the journey that they, will experience.
So, and I'm so glad you mentioned the family, right? So patients, thankfully, do not go on this journey alone, right? Randy, there were times when you weren't capable of making decisions. You were so oxygen deprived.
Right, yeah.
And so what kind of support, from the panel, what kind of support system do these patients have to have?
Currently, we require 24-hour caregiving support that has to be with the patient in earshot or at all times because they don't have a native heart. So if the machine were to malfunction for some reason, we train the caregivers how to change out that machine. Their heart will stop, and you change that out quickly and call your coordinator, hopefully. But the caregivers are responsible for that, which is a huge responsibility. And having a backup caregiver or 2 or 3 backup caregivers is super important because, as most of you know, caregiver burnout is a huge thing. And it's hard to take care of another person. It's rewarding, but I'm a mom of 2, and it's hard to be a mom of 2, let alone have somebody have a medical condition. So we train those caregivers, and we make sure that they have us as nurse coordinators. We're on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's why there's 4 of us. We rotate to be that go-to if there's any issue or question or concern.
Yeah, so Amanda mentioned the noise. So the heart beats at 132 beats a minute, and it's loud enough. It's like a small lawnmower is about the level of noise. But the other thing that you don't really anticipate is the force with which it beats. So what I tell people, if we were sitting on a couch together, Dr. Arabi and I were sitting on a couch, he would be able to feel the force of the heart through me, through the couch into him, just because of the force of these little pistons going 132 beats a minute. And so when you switch it out, like Amanda talked about that, because it's an external driver, and they have all these fail-safes built into the driver, well, you can switch batteries. There's dual batteries, and it won't stop. But when if something happens to the driver, everywhere we went, we had to take our backup driver, and it had to be within arm's reach because if something happened to that driver, you're unconscious in 8 seconds and probably dead in 30. But I think it only happened once or twice at home where we had to switch out our driver, and it was it twice? And my wife got to do it again. Active participant versus passive participant. My job was sit still and don't mess this up. Her job was, if you've ever seen the movie Iron Man, where Pepper has to reach in and grab the heart and rip that out of Robert Downey Jr.'s heart, that was her job. Have basically, unhook this one, get this one going, unhook it back up, and do it quickly before he stops breathing. So it was, she's the real hero in this story. But yeah, it's an amazing tool, and it's also a little scary and daunting.
Yeah.
So it's not for the weak of heart. Luckily, I've got an amazing wife.
So after we wrap up, and we're not done yet, do go over, if you haven't, and take a look at the SynCardia display. You can actually see what it looks like, and the team is there to talk to them. But in between that, so a lot of times I slip, right? I'll say, "Oh, Francisco," But the reality is we have with us one of the leading heart transplant surgeons in the world, in Dr. Francisco Arabia, and so it's not that often that we get to have conversations with someone who's changed the face of medicine, someone who's benefited from the face of the change in medicine, and the person that walks the patient through the journey, right? So, Doctor, we hear a lot of things about, like, there's LVADs, right? Why would somebody go to the extremes that Randy did if I can just get an LVAD? What's the difference?
Okay, well, let me just add a few things, and thank you very much for the invitation to participate.
Yes.
I can tell you the stories are amazing, and your stories is what make us do all these things. So this is the first time I met Mr. Shephard in person, but I realized when I saw his picture that I have had that picture, and I use it to give presentations around the world.
I'm waiting for my check still, but that's okay.
Keep waiting. I can tell you also mentioned something important. That is that there are some things that you don't remember, for which we are very glad that you don't remember those things. Okay? So it's great to know that. You mentioned something also, what are the surprises that the patients go through? And I can tell you that the most significant surprise that I have ever seen, multiple times, is when the patient sees us, or we see the patient is unconscious, comatose, not being perfused. So the spouse makes the decision. Go ahead and do this. It's not the patient, the spouses. And when the patient wakes up and hears the device or say, what is that thing at the end of my bed? That is, in the past, it used to be the size of a washer machine. And the answer is, well, that's your new best friend. Because you're going to be with that now for several months or several years. And people talk about the sound it makes. I can tell you that the only one that complains about the sound is the healthcare provider. I have never seen the patient or the spouse complaining about it, because it's what keeps them alive. They know they're alive. So when you say there are LVADs out there, so we know that about 80% of the patients in severe heart failure, that there is not a heart available. But 80% they can benefit from an LVAD, and an LVAD is just a little pump that helps the left side of the heart. It doesn't do anything for the right side. When I talk to people about what the LVAD is, I tell them, the LVAD is great if that's what you need, but the LVAD is not the solution for advanced heart failure. The heart has two big major chambers, and you need two major chambers. So the total artificial heart, with the LVAD, you still have your heart. With the artificial heart, you don't have your heart. And there is no EKG anymore. The patient doesn't have an EKG anymore. So it gets some getting used to the concept. And the longest patient now that we know is alive with an artificial heart is going on 9 years. We can send these patients home, which is the first one happened in 2018, actually happened in Phoenix. In 2010, actually, 2010 that we sent the first one home. And that was a whole new chapter, because he had been in that. I'm just going to mention his case because it's unique. It's his picture.
Was that Charles O'Keefe?
Charles.
I met Charles. Yeah.
You met Charles. He had the artificial heart, and in those days they couldn't go home. So he stayed in the hospital with us for 1.5 years before the FDA gave the approval to go ahead and use the portable driver that you have putting in that picture. And we put it on him. Everyone was there waiting in the hospital. We put it on. He worked for 45 minutes, and then he started misfiring, so we had to put him back on the regular console. 2 weeks go by, the FDA approves it again after some changes were made. So we decided, well, first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take you to a restaurant in Phoenix. So we took him to a restaurant in Phoenix with his wife and 3 kids. And then he says, I haven't been home now in 2 years. Do you think, and he's very close to the hospital, you think you can take me there? At least I can see my home. Because he moves into that house, and a week later he got sick. So his wife and his kids were enjoying the house. He's just in pictures. So I was like, okay, well, we'll take you to your house that you haven't seen in 2 years. Okay, and then his daughter said, hey, Dad, do you think we can watch a basketball game on TV? It was like a Wednesday afternoon, Thursday afternoon. So you want to watch a basketball game on TV with your family? Okay. And the game starts, and he starts going, and now 2 hours go by, and I tell the coordinator at that time, hey, remember, he's not discharged from the hospital. We have to take him back. That's what we agree on. Okay, so I go home, that I live very close to where he lives. Then 3 hours later, I get a call. Well, from the coordinator, well, he doesn't want to go home. What do you mean he doesn't want to go home? He has to go home. He's still a patient. So I have to drive to his house, I tell him, Charles, you're getting in my car with me and I'm going to take you back to the... So I had to take him back to the hospital. He was complaining the whole way. And he was the first patient ever to go home with an artificial heart in the world. That was 2010. 3 days later, we get the okay from the FDA to let him go home. And he didn't know, but we brought him down to the lobby in the hospital in Phoenix. And you had CNN, ABC, CNBC, CBS there, and about 300 people to see the first person ever to go home with no human heart.
Yeah.
And that's what opened the door to so many patients now.
It did, and it you know, I remember, so there was Big Blue, right?
Yes.
So
That was the washing machine.
So the first one was about the size of a small chest, ice chest, like you put your turkeys and stuff in. And you were tethered to it, and that your range of motion was not very far. And when they came out with the Freedom Driver, and it was so aptly named because it did give that patients that freedom of movement to at first just to move around the hospital room, but then to actually go further.
Yeah.
You know, one of the wonderful things about these technologies is they're continuing to change. And I know that, you know, I remember as a school child reading about the first, you know, DeBakey, the jar, and then the Jarvik, and
Yeah.
and where this came, and the multiple generations that here in Arizona, this journey would not have made it the distance if it was not for people at the University of Arizona who believed in this. It was not for Arizona investors and angel investors who believed in this, doctors who took a chance. Okay, you're a very, very famous surgeon, but when you started doing this stuff, okay, that was a big chance. You could have ruined your career,
Yeah.
but you believed. And, you know, it's been a rough journey for the patients. It's been a rough journey for the company at times, too. And you and I have both been on that journey and had a lot of conversations with people about that.
Yes, absolutely.
But when we talk, and we're wrapping things up now, when we talk about innovation, that is probably one of the most overused words. I'm sorry, the new improved Tide laundry detergent is not an innovation. The discoveries that are happening downstairs in the labs are not innovations. An innovation is when we do something in a new way that makes life better for people. Not just the patient, but the patient's caregivers, patients' families. My dad had severe heart disease that he got from getting hepatitis when I was a teenager by cleaning out a sewage backup in the basement on a New Year's Eve. My mom was having a party and she said, "You got to go clean that up." And he got hepatitis, it damaged his liver and it damaged his heart. My dad would travel here from Michigan to come visit, and he had 2 quadruples within 25 years. His valves replaced twice. He was 84 years old. He was going into multiple organ failure. And he just wasn't a good candidate at that point. But towards the end of his life, and we were in that hospice room that terrified Jackie, my dad said, "Well, could you call your friends at SynCardia and could I have that heart?" And I said, "Dad, maybe 10 years ago it would have been a good idea. But we're past that now. And my dad looked at me and he said, well, I want you to carry this story and bring it back to everybody else. He said, thanks to the people who work on the real innovations, I had an extra 30 years. I saw my 5 children graduate from college. I saw them get married. I saw them have children. I've met my great-grandchildren. And I wouldn't have had any of those experiences without the innovators and the doctors and the caregivers and the people in the clinical trials, which that's what you were in, and the people that are willing to try to do something in a new way. So remember my dad's story, please. And also all of the stories you heard here today. This is not a political place, okay? Here we are people working together as people. We fight for patient access. We fight for research dollars. We fight for patients being able to get the medicines that they need in order to live the lives they deserve to live. And we never stop fighting. But the other innovations that we're going to have to come up with are how to do it in a way that is less expensive, that is more effective, that keeps us healthier. I know, Francisco, the Banner program for heart management is an amazing program, right? The research being done here at the University of Arizona, the medical students who are going to learn how to use new tools and new technologies. And by the way, I'm looking forward to doing an interview at some point in the future with a SynCardia patient that didn't even need the Freedom Driver, and they could actually go home with an artificial heart that doesn't require a backpack. We graduated from Big Blue. Patrick, I think it's time to graduate from the Freedom Driver. Ladies and gentlemen, the president and CEO of SynCardia, Patrick. So with that, I want to thank you for hanging out with us today. I want to thank you for your stories. I want to thank you for your expertise. But patients, don't ever forget that you are the reason that this industry exists. You are the reason that we do what we do. And if you ever think that we have forgotten, please remind us, because you are the most important part of the puzzle. Thank you. And by the way, they delivered cookies after we started this presentation. And if I bring all those cookies home, my husband is going to yell at me. So please don't get me in trouble. Go get snacks on your, and we've got this room. Feel free to mix and mingle. Thank you for coming. Thank you for telling your stories.